We got a crowd tonight. Ooh.
This is actually more than John Hill's people.
Really?
For a word for
This guy
tech
came
stars.
to speak. Techstars. He came to speak from like Boston, and
Cool.
there was like 4 of us.
Well. All right. Well.
Andrew. Who's in that one? His name is up here. This one was fall. Oh, it was too powerful. No,
All right.
I fell behind this.
Did you try using the umbrella as a way to like propel yourself?
I don't know. I was trying to, but I think I was like going into the wind. It was like a headwind, not a tailwind.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm gonna just start now. All right. So, hi everybody. Thank you for coming to my talk. This is about my experience as an indie game designer and developer, more designer, and kind of what you can expect getting into the realm of game design. So, first off, who am I? Well, I'm an artist, as you could probably tell by a lot of these drawings that I've made here. I have been designing games for about 2-ish, 3-ish years now. I have been going to University of Maryland for 2 years now, and I major in immersive media design, which I am using as kind of a step for getting more into game design and learning about that. And I am a designer for the game The Sand Knight. I worked as a musician, a level designer, and a tester for the game. If you want to know a little bit about it, it's a top-down twin-stick shooter where you are a pilot who has control of a giant mech that you're using to basically chase out this evil corporation that's trying to mine this planet for all of its resources. And this was a game that we have been working on for about 2 years. We started in October of 2021, and we released it just this last January on Steam. Yes, it's pretty exciting. So we've gotten some good reviews so far and whatnot. But yeah, so our team is the BW Game Developers, standing for Baltimore, Washington, as we're kind of spread between Baltimore and Washington. So that's some of us, not all of us. It's one of our public showcases that we had. So you want to know more about the game industry. Well, the game industry is very rich in the United States. There are dozens upon dozens of studios that have plenty of opportunities and lots of positions that are open for you to express your skills, your ideas, and that is not good. Yeah, they're not having a good time right now. But that's okay, because right now, you're not worried about these huge studios. You want to make something on your own. So you want to make an indie game. But what is an indie game? Wikipedia will tell you that it is any kind of game that's created by a small team of people without the financial or technical help from a larger company or publisher, which is an interesting definition because you will find that there are a lot of independently developed games that are published by bigger companies, and they'll still be marked as indie on like Steam and the Epic Game Store and those other places where you can find those kinds of games. So I like to classify it as a game that is created by a small team of people or by an individual that can be backed by a large publisher, but is not always. We did not get a large publisher. We self-published our game. So example of a big publisher would be something like Devolver Digital, which is responsible for helping with the release of Enter the Gungeon, which is actually a game that we used as inspiration for The Sand Knight, and Cult of the Lamb, which, pun intended, is a cult classic. These are some very popular games currently out on the market. Gearbox Publishing has also helped release some games such as We Happy Few and Risk of Rain, which by now has a sequel and a remaster. So how successful can these indie games really be? The short answer is very. But You can look at some recent examples like Power World, also known as Pokemon with Guns, that has made an estimated $500 million in sales, while a AAA game such as Helldivers 2 has surpassed about $200 million. You have a game like Lethal Company, which has made about $100 million in revenue with an all-time peak of 240,000 players, about 241,000. And so then you have Five Nights at Freddy's, which got a whole movie, and that movie alone made over $200 million in the box office. So yeah, they can be pretty successful, and they can garner huge fan bases and become multimedia franchises. Now, are you going to be this successful? Probably not, but it is a possibility, but I wouldn't count on it. So one of the things with making an indie game is that everything is basically up to you. You have your time and your money that you are on making this game. Unlike a game studio where you're getting paid an hourly wage and hopefully getting some health insurance benefits, you're kind of on your own. You have to make your own decision for how you want to develop your game, how much of a budget you want to put into it, how much time you're going to spend with it, and it can be a little difficult to balance at times. The Sand Knight team, we kind of started off by creating weekly meetings where we would get together every week. I was off in Washington State going to school, dealing with schoolwork there. And so commitment was split for me as well as for other people because they were also going to school. And we would meet every week online on Discord and talk about what we wanted to do, what we've been working on, and giving each other updates and ideas for how we are going to continue with development. And so there is a level of self-discipline that you have to have and have to maintain when doing something like this, because you want your game to be made, you want the game to be developed, and the person who's going to do that is going to be you. So creating a schedule, blocking out a roadmap where you start talking about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it are really good ways of getting yourself prepped for having a routine and balancing your work-life schedule for this project that you want to make. And so it can be a bit tricky coming up with ideas and figuring out how exactly you're going to do this, but there are plenty of options. Whatever works for you is what you want to do. So for us, the way we started blocking out ideas and concept is in this program called InVision. It's basically like an online whiteboard. It's really nice. Multiple people can collaborate at once. Unfortunately, it's being discontinued this December, but that's okay because it is going into Miro, which works the exact same way. And you can create diagrams, you can do freehand drawings, you can copy, paste pictures. We used it a lot for putting up concepts and writing down ideas and drawing different things that we could be doing with our game. So how exactly do you actually do this? How do you come up with a concept, and how do you really do block these things out? Start small. And I really mean it. One of the biggest issues that game developers will have when starting out a game is overscoping. I've overscoped in plenty of game jams before, and it can really destroy motivation because you put too much on yourself at once. So starting with very small mechanics and implementing one thing at a time is what you want to do. It's okay to have a big picture in mind as the final product, but always have that first step be like a baby step. So when you're making the game, you want to start asking yourself, what is the concept? What is the genre? What is the game flow summary? What is the player going to be doing in the game? How is that gameplay loop going to work? What is the look and feel of the game? What do you want it to look like? How do you want the players to feel when they're playing it? And then, what is the scope? What are you going to start out with? What do you want to end with? And how are you going to make each step getting there? And of course, who is this for? And don't say everybody, because you can't make it for everybody. So when you're developing a game, in order to know a game and to know a game genre, you need to play games. So I always recommend looking around in the current market. What are people playing? What are people talking about? What do people say they wish they could see? And take that as inspiration. Get ideas. See what works for some games, what doesn't work for others, and take in design concepts and think about how you can translate that into your own concept, into your own idea. Because you don't want to like make a first-person shooter game and be like, I'm gonna make it so that the left trigger is to shoot and the right trigger is to aim, when every other game in that genre does the opposite. Don't do that. People are not gonna like a curveball like that. So there are some genre standards that are very important to know when making a game. So here's an example of how we created a roadmap. It's very small, but we started with very basic milestones that we would complete over time, and believe it or not, this originally started as a jam. I think we were planning on having this be like a month-long ordeal that then extended into 2 years. It happens. But we started small, the first milestone being basic character movement. And that's really simple. Really simple, but once you get that going, then you can start working on other things. So then the second milestone is an attack sequence and being able to kill an NPC. So you go from walking to dealing damage. And then you take those steps, and then we get to the last milestone where there's a boss created. So this is a layout of the core mechanics that we would add, environments, story, music, all of that other stuff. And then as we hit the first set of milestones, we created more milestones, expanding the scope once we have completed the original scope. So we then talked about how this extended out into different months and what we wanted to have at the end. So create a schedule for yourself and be organized with your thoughts. Visualize everything, because you will probably forget, even if you think your memory is great. So now you have to look at game engines, and yeah, it's a very funny pun. And basically how you're going to make this now that you've got a concept in mind. So how do you choose an engine to develop on, and what even is a game engine? So a game engine is a software framework that basically acts as a foundation for a program that you want to create. It gives you the assets, the libraries, it gives you the user interface that you need right out of the box to create something of your making and of your design. So you have to now figure out, what are you good at and what do you want to learn? Because there are dozens of different game engines, all utilize different scripting languages, because you are making software and software runs on code, and so you're going to have to do some form of coding. And so you'll have tons of different options that work with different languages and different visualizations, starting with Unity. If you know C#, Unity runs with the scripting language of C#. So if you know that language, that's perfect for you to use. If you know C++, Unreal Engine is really good, because that's what it works off of C++, as well as blueprinting. And then you have the Godot engine, which is a gaming engine that has support for multiple languages. You have C#, you have GDScript, which is an in-house language that I've heard is very similar to Python. So if you know Python, then it might be an easy transition to go into GDScript. There's also native support for C and C++. So if you know those languages, then Godot might be a good engine for you. There's also RPG Maker MV. If you don't feel like doing any of those C#, C++, or anything like that, then this runs on JavaScript. So you can utilize that if that's a language that you're more comfortable with. And then, what if you don't like coding, you hate coding, you don't even know how to code? What do? There's visual scripting. There's always a solution. So visual scripting is basically, instead of having to type everything out, you are given these nodes that you connect together that run different functions, variables, what have you, in order to create a process. So Bolt is a visual scripting style that is in Unity. It used to be like some kind of extension that you had to get, but I believe it's built into Unity now. That works pretty nicely from how I've used it. And this is an example of code running. You have all of these different variables that work into each other, these different functions, and then these little dots tell you when things are running in, or things are playing into other things and working. The Unreal Engine has blueprinting, which is basically the same. It works similar to Bolt. It has the same idea. And this is one of those things, blueprinting especially, where you start kind of asking yourself, well, what do you want to learn and what do you want to do? Because if you want to create an indie game as a way to get your foot into the industry, think about what companies you want to work for. Say if you want to work for Epic Games, they're looking for people who know how to do blueprinting and who know how to do Unreal because they use Unreal. They made Unreal. So that is a really important skill to have, and if you want to get working with them at some point, making an indie game with Unreal could be a really useful asset to your resume. So then there's also RPG Maker that has a visual scripting. It's basically an event creator where you just click on one of these things and you say, this happens when this happens, and then it's just a whole string of different events that occur. It's pretty fun, honestly. But do research. Do what you want to do. Pick an engine that works with your kind of game that you want to create. Obviously, if you want to make like a fighting game, RPG Maker is probably not going to be the thing for you, or a shooter for that matter. So look into what games have been created with what engines, and kind of you can get an idea from there. Wikipedia has a really awesome, super long list of like every game engine and its scripting language. So now to prototyping. So prototyping is a very important step when making a game. It is basically where you start putting your concepts into fruition by creating, basically you start creating your mechanics here. You start seeing some visualizations of your concepts and see what works and what doesn't. And there's multiple ways you can prototype. There's physical prototyping, which if you're making a board game, then this is usually what you want to do, where you can get paper, dice, whatever objects are around, and create something like that. And you can also use physical prototyping for creating digital games, where you can basically draw out like UI elements, map out different aspects of a game before you start having to deal with all of the nuance of software and all of the electronical things that might be a pain in the butt to deal with otherwise. So one example of physical prototyping that we did, this was a level that I designed originally on graph paper, where I have a key of where the player starts, where the boss is. We came up with an idea where there would be a big door and these generators. This is supposed to be a science lab. There are these different generators that you destroy, and once you destroy all of them, the door opens and you fight the boss. So it started out like this and then ended up looking like this at the end. So it's a bit different. Your concepts are going to change over time, and that's not a bad thing. This was after extensive testing and playing around with different layouts, and this is what we came to making as the best outcome. So there's also digital prototyping. Digital prototyping comes in many different forms. You have visual prototyping, you've got auditorial prototyping. Example of the prototyping we did with audio was we were trying to see if we wanted voice acting in the game. So our project manager decided to be a stand-in for one of the characters. And he would talk like this all the time, and he would like give you instructions like this. That ended up staying in the game. A lot of people really liked that. So if you play the game, you're gonna hear him speaking as one of the characters. It's a little funny. But this was a storyboard idea flowchart that we created for one of the trailers. And there are all sorts of different software that you can use. You have Adobe XD, you've got Figma, you have 3D modeling tools such as Blender and Maya, you have Miro as previously mentioned, and Krita for drawing concept art, Storyboard Pro for making storyboards. Some of these are not free, but since we're all University of Maryland students here, use this. It's good. You got it for free-ish. But so this is another example of some prototyping that we did for a helicopter boss. In one of the later levels of our game, we talk about how it moves around, what the area looks like, what its different attacks are, and kind of mapping out how we want to create it, and getting an idea and a feel for it before we start fully building it into its final form. And then this is some other concept playing around with that we did for an artillery tank enemy, and different kinds of enemies that we would create. Here's some concept art for one of the bosses that we have in the game, created by one of our artists, super talented. So you get a feel for size comparison for different kinds of attacks and animations it could possibly have. And then we have more concept art of some promotional art that we are going to put on our social media. I think we went with 2. I don't remember, but there's all sorts of different forms. And then here's a menu that we made for upgrading your mech between levels of the game. This is what it originally looked like for a while, and then this is what the final product ended up looking like as we made improvements, and we were like, yeah, this other one's a little bit clunky. And so that's something that you figure out as you go through testing. So now we talk about play testing and iterative design. So iterative design, it's not straightforward. It's all about basically kind of repeating the same rules over and over again. Or you start with the planning, you start going into what do you need to start making everything, and then you start designing, you start creating, you start building, and then once you've got something that's functional, then you start testing it. You can test it internally. Usually you want to test things internally first before you then give it to more people. That can be with yourself and your teammates, people who are close to you. And then you take those results and you evaluate them, and then you then figure out from there how to then work on making improvements, how to change the design, and then doing it all over again. And one thing about this chart is that it doesn't account for after deployment. You're kind of still going to be doing this. You might notice if you play games that even after they've released, you're going to get updates for it that fix known bugs or add in quality of life changes. That's something that just happens because you release a game and people report things that are wrong with it, and of course you want it to be good, you want it to be better, so you're going to improve it. So you keep doing that whole iterative process until it is at the spot you want it to be, which might be never. There's always bugs, but you try your best. And so then you ask yourself, what exactly are you testing for? There are different phases of prototyping where you start with the foundations. You're taking your concept, you're starting to lay it out, and you go, all right, is this concept fun? Is this engaging? Is this going to be something that people want to play? Does this have a feel to it where it's fulfilling? And then you start working on the structure, where you then put in the core mechanics, and then you start going, okay, does this work? Can I have this at a stable enough spot where it can do something? And then you're still looking for, does this work, and does it work well enough that you can have fun with it? And then you start getting into the more formal details where you start putting more things together, you start putting more additional mechanics in, you start compiling all of your art, your music, that really gets that feel for the entire game. And right now you're not looking at fun, you're looking at, does this work? Is it complete, and is it balanced? And balance is always going to be really difficult because you have basically 2 elements of game design, which would be excitement and tension when it comes to the player. Excitement is basically what the player can do, where the player is able to take themselves, the player's ability overall, and then tension is what limits the player. There always needs to be limits. You need to have that balance so that something isn't too easy, it becomes boring, the player doesn't have too much power over everything. So then you have to figure that out and basically work with that, test it for it. And then once you've got something that works, that's complete and balanced as it can be, then you start looking again, is this fun? And if people are saying it's not fun, then you work on that, you change that, you refine it. And then you want to look at accessibility. I won't go too much into accessibility, but accessibility is important if you want to expand your audience. Our game, by default, is colorblind. Red-green colorblind is accessible because our project manager has red-green colorblindness, so he was able to let us know if something was if the ground was too noisy and had too much blending in with bullets and hiding everything and made it difficult to see. So he would let us know for that, and we would, our lead artist would change things up if that needed to be. I would change up some of the groundwork in the game if that was an issue. But this is an example of one of our setups here. This was at AwesomeCon in Washington, D.C. We have people who come in, play our game, and a lot of times we're sitting there and we're watching on the other side of the monitor, taking notes. This was at MagFest at National Harbor, where we did the same thing. I'm standing there with a notebook, watching people play, taking notes of how they're doing, what's going on. And you're going to find, once you start play testing, once you start finding people outside of your close group to play your game, that you might think your design is really solid, you might think that things are really clear, and this is where you're going to learn that it's not. This is where you're going to learn that things are going to break a lot more easily than you thought, and players are unpredictable. You have no idea what they're going to do, and you just have to sit there as they start fooling around and nearly breaking your game, and you're just going to have to take it. And you can't help them. If you see, one of the biggest mistakes that I see some developers do is that when a player is going through a game, they stand over their shoulder and they go, oh, no, you got to do that, you got to do that. You can't tell them that. You're not going to be there when they're playing the game on their own. Like, your game needs to tell people what they're doing and how to do it. So you'll run into frustrations, but the feedback that you get from that is very important for helping improve your game. Even if it's frustrating, even if you don't like it. I know sometimes it can be difficult because it's easy for some people to take criticism to heart and then get really upset by it. Just separate yourself from the game. You know, I know it's your child, but in order to make your child better, you have to listen to that criticism, and you have to use that criticism to improve it. So one story we have had with some really interesting and frustrating playtesting is this one kid who got to this part in the tutorial level. So here at this part, you're given a grenade, and you're supposed to throw the grenade to this group of enemies. So I'm watching this kid, I have my notebook out, and he looks at these enemies, and then he looks at this wall right here, and he throws the grenade at the wall, which hits the wall, bounces off, and blows him up. And I was like, huh, okay, well, it's not the first time that's happened, so make note of that. So he runs through the tutorial again, gets back here, and I'm like, okay, so now he's going to throw the grenade at these guys, learning from his past mistake. No. He looks back at the wall, throws the grenade again, it bounces off the wall, and it blows him up again. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So then I watch him go through the tutorial level for the second time now, and now he's standing here, and I'm like, third time's the charm. He's got to do it now. That's where you'd be wrong. He ends up throwing the grenade for a third time at this wall, blowing himself up. And at this point, I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And I look at him, I try to get a gauge on what it looks like he's thinking, and there's a complete blank look on his face. And I'm like, okay. And by this point, my project manager has also noticed this, and he's standing there also going, huh? And so by the fourth time, I'm so happy to say he managed to blow them up and then get along with the rest of the tutorial. This kid was absolutely some kind of outlier. But we ended up still learning from it, because we've decided now that we need a checkpoint here for if you blow yourself up, you don't have to go through the entire rest of the tutorial to get back here. Because if I have to watch somebody blow themselves up and go through the tutorial one more time, I might explode. So, what your playtesters do is important, even if it drives you crazy. You can always learn something from what they do, and I always encourage you to really pay attention. And even if it feels like they're doing something absolutely ridiculous, try to understand what they're doing. Talk to them even when they're done. Get a gauge for how they felt playing the game, what they enjoyed, what they didn't, and make sure to write down the good and the bad. And if you're trying to figure out how to even get playtesters, a lot of people, there are public venues that you can go to. Sometimes they cost money, but a lot of people are happy to just play a game if they see a flyer up that says, hey, come play test my game and this building on campus. And then offer free pizza or candy or something. Offer a little something as a thank you for people's time, because you want to show your appreciation that you really like that they came in and played your game and gave you feedback. And so you end up compiling all of this feedback. And this is an example of some takeaways that we got from MagFest, where we identified some things that needed work. We talked to some players who were like, yeah, we don't really like this upgrade screen. It's kind of difficult to read. It's kind of difficult to navigate through. So we know that that's something that needs to be fixed. We knew that there was some controller support that needed to be improved. But we also wrote down that players actually enjoyed the pacing of the game, they enjoyed the aesthetic of the game, and that people overall seemed interested in the game. You want to know what's positive, you want to know what's negative, what to change, and of course what to keep. And so these are priorities that our project manager wrote, and then some other priorities that we needed to add into the game. And with some people being interested in the story, we knew that we needed to work a bit more with the story. And one of the kind of examples that come up in my mind when we talk about adding more story into our game is the game We Happy Few, which started off as a very small project that got funded over on Kickstarter and then got picked up by Gearbox Publishing and Xbox Studios to become something a lot bigger. They went through a lot of play testing, and I'll just read this quote from the founder and creative director of Compulsion Games, the company behind We Happy Few, where Guillaume Provost says, "You can't please everyone. You definitely always have some certain individuals who say, hey, I thought we were making a really hardcore procedurally generated systematic survival game, and then you have these people who are interested in the story. They're like, hey, I want to experience the story. Why are these stupid survival mechanics in the way?" And that real kind of Frankensteinish of trying to please too many people at once was definitely one of the things he felt was difficult, and that's due to the changing nature of direction that the project took. And so you're going to get this kind of conflict with your game, most likely, where you have to kind of decide, what audience am I trying to work with more? What do I want to do? Because remember, this is your project. So you want to fix it, you want to do what can appeal to people, but you also want to do what's yours. You want to have your idea still in there to a degree. And you want your project to go in a direction that you would like for it to go. So you pick which path you want to go. And this was something we had with Sand Knight, where we had people who absolutely did not care about the story whatsoever. And they were like, oh my god, why do I have to sit through these cutscenes? This is so obnoxious. And then you had some people who were genuinely interested that would sit and watch through the cutscenes and go, wow, this is really cool. I wish I knew more about this. And you can create situations where you kind of cater to both groups, such as the ability to skip cutscenes. We created that so that people who don't care and just want to play the game can skip it, and then people who do care and want to know the story can sit and stay. So know your audience, know the audience you want to pertain to, and know the genre that you want to work with. And have fun with it, honestly. One of the biggest things with making a game is kind of how it feels very daunting. With all of this work that you're going to have to do in designing, redesigning, maybe an idea that you thought was really awesome didn't work out, and it can be a bit upsetting at times, but it happens. It happens to everybody. And I want to close on with this note from Zeekers, who is the creator of Lethal Company, where he says, if you want to make games, then go ahead and get into it. The more you talk about doing something without doing it, the less likely you are to do it. Just be prepared, as learning is a journey. You're going to be learning a lot. You're going to be learning things that you didn't know you'd be learning when making a game. And that is the whole process of making a game. Doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter how long you've been developing, you're going to be learning something. And I think that is really important, to be open to learning and to be open to having fun and making a game that expresses you, that expresses what you want to express, and that has creative direction as well as having elements of fun. So yeah, any questions? Yeah, what's up?
So you mentioned that if you're going to make games, you have to play games. Are there any games that, like, off the bat, are definitely all game developers should play this game or these games? Or maybe some of this is about other kinds of games, like maybe not as story-driven, just like general arcade type games.
General arcade type games. I would say that's very dependent on the genre that you're making a game for. For Sand Knight, we took inspiration from games like Metal Slug, Enter the Gungeon, I think a little bit of Contra too, which are some arcade-like games. And we used that kind of as a foundation for what made these games popular, and what we can do, but also do differently enough that it is still our own thing. So like if you're making something like a platformer, you know, you can look at Mario games. They're super wildly popular. You can look at something like, I'm like totally blanking, Kirby. Games that are big hits, see why they're big hits. Looking at like survival horror franchise, what works there, like what made these big stars in the genre so popular. Yeah.
You mentioned like you self-published. What's the process of self-publishing on like a platform like Steam versus like having a publisher? Like what's the implementation there? Like at what level do you consider like, oh, maybe we need to partner with a publisher on this? What does a publisher like do for you?
So I'm not exactly sure what the process was like for publishing on Steam, because our project manager did all of that. I do know that you have to submit your game to Valve in order for them to look through it and make sure that it works and you're not just about to give everyone like malware or something like that. So there is a level of an application process essentially that you have to go through. Working with bigger publishing companies, such as Devolver, Nintendo, all of that, they give you tools to basically have your game release on more platforms. Nintendo, for example, Nintendo is a very tough application process from what I've heard. We tried to apply for the developer kit and to publish our game on the Switch. We got denied. So it can be a lengthy process. From what I know. And the benefit of having a big publisher behind you is that you do get some both financial support and more ability to platform in multiple places. Yeah.
What's the process like for coming up with ideas for your game?
So it's kind of like a big, you could think of it as like a big get-together with a giant whiteboard. We were kind of scattered around the United States at the time when we first started this project. So we used an online collaborative tool where we basically decided what kind of game do we want to make, And we actually started out with the sprite for the mech, the Sand Knight mech. And we were like, what can we do with this sprite? What can we make that this sprite fits into? And then it kind of snowballed into making like a top-down shooter with kind of like this idea of like some kind of militaristic corporation having control of like this dusty dune-like planet. And we just went onto the internet. We kind of looked at like different ideas for environments, for military tanks, for weapons, for armor. And we put together what we liked. We kind of circled like what we wanted to work with, what we wanted to stick with, and then translated some of that into the actual designs that we created. Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in like game mechanics and also game physics. Like when you're talking about how the bomb bounces off the wall, is that like intentional as far as like game design, or?
For the bomb to bounce off of things, yes. We did actually end up changing that mechanic just a little bit because we noticed a lot of people ended up blowing themselves up at that section. So we made it, if it hits a wall, it bounces back at you, you catch it. So it doesn't blow up on you.
So how do you decide like when it comes to game development, the game mechanics that you want to incorporate into your game?
How do you decide them?
Yeah.
So you start with the basics, like how do you want to move? How do you want to attack? We started with the small pilot who we wanted to be able to move around pretty quickly. And our project manager, he would program in the movement. And then you want to account for kind of the idea that you're going for. So we make a giant mech, so it makes sense for the mech to walk very slowly. And so you make a movement mechanic that has a slower speed than many of the other things around you because the enemies that you end up fighting are smaller. And then you basically kind of use a bit of logic with your idea that you're creating, and you take like the concept of a tank. How does a tank move? How can I create a script that makes sense, that matches how a tank would move? And then applying animations and everything that then ties it all in together to make it believable.
Yeah. Because one thing I was more interested in is like projectile motion. So like for instance, take for example Angry Birds.
Yeah.
Right. I know like that requires probably like a lot of like math, such as like algebraic expressions, kernel equations. But like to think of like those concepts, like I'm just curious, like how does that like come to play? Oh yeah, I need to use that physics equation to get on candy.
Sometimes you figure it out once you've tested it a bit. Sometimes it's not always like super obvious. Like I've done stupid things where I've created a character in Unity who jumps and then falls, but I forget that you want to like account gravity and everything, so it'll go up and then like right to the ground, and then you go, oh yeah, gravity, and then you write in a line for that. And so you might not be able to think of everything right away. You can try and draw things out, map them out, and go, okay, it's going to move like this. If it's like Sonic, is it going to pick up speed over time? And then how you're going to write that. And you might just start with something really basic, and then as you're playing, you're like, oh, I really need it to do this. And then you figure it out from there. Yeah. So I always recommend either trying to learn some art yourself or finding an artist, because especially with animations, those can be a bit tricky to do. And there are lots of different programs out there that you can work with. Like we used Sprite to make all of our pixel art. It's an art program that's specifically for pixel art and pixel animation. And so I recommend kind of looking around, seeing if anybody would be willing to work with you to do art for a project, or and this is where some of the budgeting might come in, where you might want to think about commissioning somebody to make something for your game. Like we did, I think we might have done like a music commission or an art commission once or twice for the game, if not for a different game, where we pay people once to make something, and then we put it in the game, and that's that. So it depends on what kind of style you want to go for, and like once again, like looking up images on like Google and stuff, and getting a feel for what you want things to look like, and then you can communicate that with an artist if you find one, and then, or you can try and learn how to make it yourself. But there's different ways you can do it. Yeah.
You showed like a roadmap and how like the direction of the game can change a lot over time. How does that map to like, oh, we have all this art, or we have all of this like existing scripting? How do you like manage the process of further development while trying to keep some of the work you've done, but maybe having to throw some stuff on it? Like, what's your experience with that?
So we add on to what we have. So starting with like the basic tile mapping for our game, we create tile maps for that, and which would be like our lead artist would draw out each tile and then how they would combine together, and we put them together. And even as we might grow the scope, those tile map elements are still there, and we can still use them. Like once we get into a next level, like we'll add some new things, but we still have some old things that we'll keep using, because why wouldn't we keep using them? So it kind of builds upon itself, where like you're gonna use the same script for movement throughout the game. Like you're gonna use the same kind of enemies. You'll add on more enemies as the game goes on. Like that's what we did. We started out with like very basic enemy pilots, which then increased to having like these more armored guys that would chase after you. But we still had the stuff that we originally started with. Yeah.
How many people were on your team, and how do you draw behind each other?
How many people on the team is not a number that I can totally give, because we've had a lot of people go in and out, because it's been a very loose team. But a lot of us were friends in community college, and we had done game jams with each other before. So like my project manager hit me up one day, and he was like, "Hey, we're thinking about doing a game jam. Do you wanna make music for the game?" And I was like, "Sure." And so through the people I met in community college, we ended up getting together online. And then there were some other people that we did meet that were from the internet that we brought onto the team. Although I've noticed that you can have issues bringing people on from online spaces, because they might not be as committed to the project as you are, and it's kind of difficult to have much of a personal connection as you would with somebody in real life. But I want to say we've at least had like 6 or 7, I want to say, like people in the team who've like really stuck with the whole project all the way through. Yeah.
Great job, Erin. I loved it.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay. Yay! Alright, cool. Thank you guys.